The reading of the will felt like watching a performance where I already knew the tragic ending. My parents' attorney delivered his lines with practiced precision as my brother's smile grew wider with each bequest. And to my son Gregory, as the more financially responsible and deserving heir, I leave the entirety of the Harrington family estate and holdings. My brother's triumphant glance in my direction confirmed what I'd suspected for years. I'd been written out of my own legacy. What neither of us knew then was that my grandfather's trust document, yellowed with age and forgotten by everyone except its creator, was about to rewrite the entire script. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The oppressive weight of old wealth and new betrayal hung in the air of Harrington House like an invisible shroud. I stood in the great room where generations of my family had celebrated triumphs and weathered tragedies, staring at the ancestral portrait of my grandfather, Walter Harrington, the true architect of our family's fortune. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air, a fitting metaphor for the family legacy now suspended in uncertainty. 3 days had passed since my parents' attorney had read the will that effectively erased me from the Harrington financial legacy. Though I had prepared myself for disappointment, the public nature of the disinheritance had cut deeper than I'd anticipated. My brother Gregory had received everything: the estate, the investment portfolios, the controlling interest in Harrington Healthcare, the company our grandfather had built from a single clinic into a regional network of specialized care facilities. Ms. Harrington? The housekeeper's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Mr. Patterson is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Alan Patterson had been my grandfather's attorney, long since retired and replaced by younger, more aggressive lawyers who better matched my parents' temperament. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. Thank you, Margaret. Please show him in. Alan Patterson walked into the room with the measured pace of someone who had spent a lifetime delivering news that altered people's lives, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. At 78, he remained impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair combed perfectly, his piercing blue eyes still sharp despite the wrinkles that had deepened around them. Charlotte, he said warmly, taking my hands in his. It's been too long. I was sorry to hear about your parents. The accident was unexpected. The car crash that had claimed both my mother and father 2 weeks ago had been unexpected indeed. A patch of black ice on a mountain road they had driven hundreds of times. The shock had barely begun to wear off when the will reading had delivered its second blow. Thank you for coming, Mr. Patterson, though I admit I'm surprised to see you. I thought you'd retired years ago. He smiled, the expression softening, his formal demeanor. I did, but some documents never quite let you retire completely. He patted the leather portfolio he carried. May we sit? What I have to share requires some explanation. We settled into the pair of wingback chairs positioned before the fireplace, chairs where my grandfather had once told me stories of how he'd built his business, one patient at a time, with a revolutionary approach to specialized healthcare that put patient outcomes above profit margins. I understand your parents' will left everything to Gregory, Patterson began, his tone carefully neutral. I nodded, fighting to keep my expression composed. They made their preferences clear. Gregory followed the path they laid out. Harvard, business school, marriage to the daughter of their closest friends, 2 perfect children, and a commitment to running Harrington Healthcare exactly as they believed it should be run. While you chose Stanford Medical School and a career as a practicing physician rather than a healthcare executive, Patterson observed. The ultimate disappointment, I said, with a wry smile that didn't reach my eyes. Wanting to actually treat patients instead of managing spreadsheets. At 34, I had completed my residency in neurosurgery and had recently been offered a position as head of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General, a prestigious achievement that had earned only passing acknowledgement from my parents. Gregory, 2 years my senior, had spent the last decade managing various departments of Harrington Healthcare under our father's watchful eye, being groomed to eventually take control. Your grandfather would have been proud of your choice, Patterson said quietly. Perhaps. But my grandfather has been gone for 15 years, and his opinions died with him. Patterson's eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite identify. Not entirely. He opened his portfolio and removed a thick envelope sealed with wax imprinted with the Harrington family crest. Your grandfather Walter came to see me a month before he passed away. He amended his trust with specific instructions that it was to remain sealed until both of your parents had passed and their will had been executed. My heart began to race as Patterson handed me the envelope. What does it say? I think you should read it yourself, he replied. But I will say this. Your grandfather was an extraordinarily perceptive man who understood that families don't always make the wisest choices about succession. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of legal documents. As I read through the dense legal language, certain phrases leapt from the page. Secondary trust activation upon the death of Robert and Eleanor Harrington. Contingent ownership of Harrington Healthcare voting shares. Control to be transferred to the descendant practicing medicine. Supersedes any subsequent division of assets. I looked up at Patterson, hardly daring to believe what I was reading. This says that regardless of my parents' will, 60% of the voting shares of Harrington Healthcare transfer to me upon their death, that the trust my grandfather established holds these shares separately from the family estate, and that he specifically designated them for whichever grandchild pursued medicine. Patterson nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Walter believed that healthcare should be led by those who understand medicine, not just business. He saw something in you even when you were a teenager, a commitment to the principles upon which he built the company. He feared that without intervention, the company might someday prioritize profit over patient care. I stared at the document, emotions warring within me, vindication, shock, a strange sense of belated connection with my grandfather. Gregory won't accept this quietly, I said finally. No, I don't expect he will, Patterson agreed, which is why your grandfather included this as well. He removed another envelope from his portfolio, this one addressed to Gregory in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. What does it say? I asked. I don't know. It's for Gregory alone. But knowing your grandfather, I suspect it contains both wisdom and incentive for cooperation. Patterson rose from his chair. The trust documents have already been filed. With the court. As of this moment, Charlotte, you control Harrington Healthcare. The weight of this revelation settled over me. I had never sought this power, had, in fact, deliberately chosen a path away from the executive suite. Yet my grandfather had seen fit to place the company he built in my hands rather than my brother's. Why didn't my parents know about this? I asked. Your grandfather amended his trust privately. He knew your parents favored Gregory's approach to business and feared they might find a way to circumvent his wishes if they knew. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of the estate that would remain my brother's. I didn't care about the house or the material wealth, but the company, the network of hospitals and clinics that served thousands of patients across 3 states. That was a legacy that mattered. What happens now? I asked. That, Patterson said, gathering his things, is entirely up to you. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. As controlling shareholder, you have the right to attend and make your position known. He paused at the door. Your grandfather used to say that Harrington Healthcare wasn't built on money. It was built on the radical notion that excellent care and sound business weren't mutually exclusive. After Patterson left, I remained in the great room, the trust documents in my hands, my grandfather's portrait seeming to watch me with new meaning. The company that my brother had expected to inherit was now mine to lead, though I had never aspired to corporate leadership. My phone rang, breaking the moment of contemplation. Gregory's name flashed on the screen. News traveled fast in the world of wealth and power. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Gregory." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice vibrated with barely controlled rage. "Patterson just called to tell me about some trust? This is ridiculous. Dad left the company to... me." "It appears our grandfather had other ideas," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Ideas that legally supersede Dad's will." "This is a mistake," Gregory snapped. "You're a doctor, not a CEO. You know nothing about running a healthcare system." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. "I know everything about healthcare, Gregory. That was precisely Grandfather's point." "I'll fight this," he threatened. "I'll have our lawyers tear that trust apart." "You're welcome to try," I said calmly. "In the meantime, I'll see you at the board meeting tomorrow morning." After hanging up, I realized my hands were no longer trembling. In place of the shock and uncertainty I had felt moments before, a strange calm had settled over me. I hadn't asked for this responsibility, but now that it had been placed in my hands, I recognized it for what it was. Not just an inheritance, but a chance to honor my grandfather's vision and perhaps transform it for a new era. I pulled my laptop from my bag and began to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. If I was to lead Harrington Healthcare, I would need to demonstrate from the first moment that I understood both the medicine and the business. As a neurosurgeon, I was accustomed to high-stakes situations where preparation meant the difference between life and death. This was simply a different kind of operation, one with thousands of patients' well-being in the balance. As the sun set over Harrington House, casting long shadows across the room where generations of my family had made decisions that shaped their world, I made my own decision. I would accept this unexpected inheritance not as a victory over my brother, but as a responsibility to the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. A legacy of healing that was worth far more than money alone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Harrington Healthcare boardroom exuded power from every polished surface. 21 executive chairs surrounded the massive mahogany table where decisions affecting thousands of lives had been made for decades. The wall of windows overlooked the Boston skyline, a reminder of the company's prominent position in the city's landscape and economy. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy suit that had served me well during hospital board presentations. I had deliberately chosen not to sit at the head of the table. That would be too provocative. Instead, I took a seat midway down the right side, arranging my materials with meticulous precision. The trust documents, my notes on the company's current financials, and a proposal I had stayed up most of the night preparing. Board members began filing in at 10 minutes to 9. I recognized most of them from company events over the years, my father's trusted advisors and colleagues, people who had watched me grow up but had never considered me a serious part of the company's future. Their expressions ranged from confusion to poorly concealed hostility as they noted my presence. No one chose to sit beside me. Gregory arrived last, flanked by our family's attorney, Philip Winters, and the company's CFO, Martin Reeves. He had positioned his entrance for maximum effect. The grieving son and rightful heir, now confronted by an unexpected challenger. He wore our father's favorite tie, I noticed, a power move meant to remind everyone in the room whose son he believed should be in charge. "Charlotte," he said, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. "This is a private board meeting. Family members are welcome at the memorial service next week, but this is a business matter." Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened once more, and Alan Patterson entered, followed by a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, black, with close-cropped silver hair and an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. "Actually," Patterson said, his voice stronger than it had been in our private conversation. "Ms. Harrington has every right to be here. In fact, this meeting cannot legally proceed without her." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Vivian Taylor, from Taylor & Associates. She'll be serving as Ms. Harrington's legal counsel today." Vivian stepped forward, distributing folders to each board member. "Good morning. Inside you'll find certified copies of the Walter Harrington Trust documents, which have been validated by the court. These documents confirm that Charlotte Harrington now controls 60% of Harrington Healthcare's voting shares." The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Gregory's face flushed deep red as he snatched a folder and rifled through it, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything that would undo this reversal of fortune. "This is preposterous," Philip Winters declared, rising to his feet. "Robert Harrington's will clearly stated that all family assets, including company shares, were to pass to Gregory. This alleged trust document must be fraudulent." "I assure you, it's entirely authentic," Patterson replied calmly. "Walter Harrington established this trust 15 years ago with specific instructions for its execution. The trust held the majority of voting shares separately from the family estate. Robert and Eleanor Harrington owned only 30% of the company, outright, shares which indeed passed to Gregory according to their will. The remaining 10% is held by various minor shareholders, some of whom are present in this room." Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "My sister is a surgeon, not a business executive. She has no experience, no qualifications to run a healthcare system." "That's precisely why Walter established this arrangement," Patterson continued, unruffled by Gregory's outburst. "He specifically designated that control should pass to the grandchild who pursued medicine, who understood healthcare from the provider perspective. This is a corporate boardroom, not an operating theater," Gregory sneered. "The company needs someone who understands financial management, market strategy, growth potential, not someone who spent her career focused on a single narrow specialty." I had expected this attack, had prepared for it. Taking a deep breath, I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Neurosurgery might be a specialized field, Gregory, but it teaches you something essential about leadership. You learn to make life-altering decisions based on complex information, under extreme pressure, while managing a team of highly specialized professionals, all while keeping the patient's ultimate welfare as your guiding principle." I stood up, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "I'm not here to dismantle what our family has built. I'm here because our grandfather believed that Harrington Healthcare needed medical leadership to fulfill its potential. And after reviewing the company's performance over the past 5 years, I believe he was right." I opened my folder and directed everyone's attention to the financial summaries I had prepared. "Our profit margins have increased by 22% in the past 3 years. Impressive on paper. But look closer at how those profits were achieved. Reduced staffing ratios in critical care units, substitution of less expensive but less effective treatment protocols, decreased investment in preventative care programs that don't show immediate returns." The board members shifted uncomfortably. These were strategies that had been implemented gradually, each justified by financial necessity, each incrementally moving the company away from its founding principles. "Meanwhile," I continued, "our patient outcome metrics have declined. Readmission rates are up 8%. Patient satisfaction scores have dropped from the 89th percentile nationally to the 74th. Staff turnover has increased by 17%, particularly among our most experienced nurses." Gregory's expression had shifted from anger to calculation. He recognized that I had done my homework, that this wasn't the impulsive action of a resentful sister, but a carefully considered challenge to his vision for the company. "These are temporary adjustments," he countered smoothly. "Necessary responses to market pressures and regulatory changes. Every healthcare system in the country is making similar adaptations." "That's true," I acknowledged, but our grandfather built this company on the belief that excellent care and financial success weren't mutually exclusive. He believed, and I believe, that superior patient outcomes ultimately drive superior financial performance. I could see uncertainty in some board members' eyes now. They had been comfortable with Gregory's familiar approach, with the gradual prioritization of financial metrics over patient care. But they also remembered my grandfather's leadership, how his unwavering commitment to quality had built the company's reputation and success. "This is all very inspiring," Gregory said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But healthcare has changed since grandfather's day. Insurance reimbursements are down, regulatory compliance costs are up, and competitors are consolidating. We need practical business solutions, not idealistic platitudes about patient care." He turned to address the board directly. "My sister may technically control more shares for the moment, but this board still makes operational decisions. I move that we maintain our current strategic direction and that the board appoint me as CEO, as was clearly our father's intention." Philip Winters nodded vigorously. "I second the motion." "Before we vote," I said quickly, "I'd like to present an alternative vision." I distributed the second set of documents I had prepared, a strategic plan that outlined a different approach to the challenges Gregory had described. This proposal maintains our financial viability while realigning our practices with our founding principles. It includes targeted investments in preventative care that reduce costly acute interventions, staff retention initiatives that decrease the expensive cycle of recruitment and training, and evidence-based treatment protocols that improve outcomes and reduce readmissions. I paused, letting the information sink in. I'm not suggesting we abandon fiscal responsibility. I'm proposing that we pursue it through excellence rather than compromise. The oldest board member, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who had worked with my grandfather from the company's earliest days, spoke up for the first time. "These proposals have merit. They reflect Walter's original vision while acknowledging current market realities." She looked at me with newfound respect. "I didn't expect this level of preparation, Charlotte." Gregory's jaw tightened as he sensed the shift in the room. "This is absurd." She shows up with a fancy trust document and some hastily assembled proposals, and suddenly we're abandoning years of careful strategic planning. Our father would be appalled. "Our father is gone," I said quietly. "And while I respected him deeply, I believe our grandfather's vision for this company was the truer one. Healthcare led by those who understand medicine, not just finance." Gregory pushed back his chair and stood, his expression cold and determined. "This isn't over, Charlotte. The lawyers will review every word of that trust document. And while they do, I'll be talking to each board member individually about the practical realities of letting a surgeon with zero management experience take control of a billion-dollar healthcare system." He gathered his materials and nodded to Philip Winters and Martin Reeves. "Gentlemen, shall we? We have work to do." As they left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the boardroom. The remaining board members looked uncertain, caught between loyalty to my father's designated successor and the legal reality of my controlling interest. "I know this is unexpected," I said into the silence. "I know many of you have worked closely with my brother and my father, and this change feels disruptive. I'm not asking for your immediate support. I'm asking for your open-minded consideration of a different approach." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "I think we could all use some time to review these materials properly. Perhaps we should reconvene in a few days after everyone has had a chance to digest this information." The board agreed to meet again in 3 days. As they filed out, several members nodded politely in my direction. Not enthusiastic support, but not outright rejection either. It was a start. Vivian Taylor remained behind after the others had left. "That went about as well as could be expected," she observed. "Your brother won't give up easily, you know." "I know," I replied, gathering my documents. "He's already making calls, securing allies, looking for weaknesses in the trust. "And what will you be doing?" she asked, studying me with shrewd eyes. I thought about the enormous responsibility that had just been placed in my hands, about the thousands of employees and tens of thousands of patients whose lives would be affected by the decisions I made in the coming days and weeks. "I'll be doing what I've always done," I answered, "preparing thoroughly, consulting experts, and remembering that at the heart of every decision is a human life that matters." As we left the boardroom, I could feel the weight of my grandfather's legacy settling around my shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. He had believed I was the right person to carry Harrington Healthcare forward. Now I needed to prove him right. I spent the evening after the board meeting in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of reports on Harrington Healthcare's operations. Financial statements, patient outcome metrics, staffing analyses, and competitor benchmarks covered every surface of my dining table. The data painted a concerning picture, a company gradually drifting from its founding principles in pursuit of profit maximization. My phone had been ringing incessantly, board members seeking private conversations, industry contacts curious about the sudden power shift, reporters hoping for an exclusive on the Harrington family drama. I had answered none of them, focusing instead on understanding the company I'd unexpectedly inherited. At nearly midnight, an incoming text message finally broke my concentration. "You should check your email. AP." Alan Patterson rarely texted, which meant this was important. I opened my laptop and found a message from him with a simple subject line: "From the vault." The email contained a single attachment, a video file labeled Walter Harrington, 2008. With curious fingers, I clicked play. My grandfather's face filled the screen. Though clearly filmed in his final months, his eyes remained sharp and intelligent in a face marked by illness. He sat in his home office, the room lined with medical texts and family photographs. "Hello, Charlotte," he began, and my breath caught in my throat. "If you're watching this, then both your parents have passed, and my trust provisions have been activated. I imagine this has come as quite a shock to you, and to your brother." I paused the video, overwhelmed by the strange intimacy of being addressed directly by a man 15 years deceased. After a steadying breath, I pressed play again. "I've watched you grow into a remarkable young woman, principled, compassionate, and willing to challenge conventions when they stand in the way of doing what's right. These are the same qualities that guided me when I built Harrington Healthcare from a single clinic into what it is today." He shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable but determined to continue. "I founded this company with a radical idea, that providing exceptional patient care would create exceptional business results, not the other way around. Your father and I disagreed fundamentally on this point. He believed that financial optimization should drive all decisions, with quality being important, but secondary." He sighed, the weight of this philosophical divide evident in his expression. "I fear that without intervention, Harrington Healthcare will become just another corporate healthcare entity, efficient perhaps, profitable certainly, but having lost its soul, its purpose. That's why I've arranged for control to pass to you, Charlotte, rather than Gregory." My grandfather leaned closer to the camera, his voice strengthening with conviction. "This isn't about favoritism or family politics. It's about entrusting the company to someone who understands that medicine is, at its core, a human endeavor. Your brother is intelligent and capable, but he sees spreadsheets where you see people." He paused, then continued with a gentler tone. "Now, what you do with this responsibility is entirely your choice. You may choose to lead the company yourself, or appoint leaders who share your values, or even sell your shares and pursue your medical career unencumbered. The decision is yours. But before you decide, I'd like to share something with you." My grandfather reached for a leather portfolio similar to the one Patterson had brought to Harrington House. "In this folder is..." A proposal I never had the chance to implement. A blueprint for what I called the Integrated Care Initiative. It represents where I believed healthcare needed to go. A model that breaks down the silos between specialties, between prevention and treatment, between medical care and the social factors that determine health outcomes. He held up several pages of notes and diagrams. I've asked Alan to provide you with my original documents. They're outdated now, of course, but the principles remain sound. Perhaps you'll find them useful as you consider your own path forward. My grandfather's expression softened, a smile warming his tired face. Charlotte, I've watched you fight. For your patients. Challenge conventional wisdom when the evidence demanded it, and maintain your integrity in a system that often rewards expedience over excellence. Those qualities matter more than any business degree or executive experience. He leaned back in his chair, seemingly satisfied with what he had said. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the physician and the person you have become. Trust your judgment, Charlotte. It's better than you think. The video ended, leaving me staring at a blank screen, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather had offered not just an inheritance, but a vision, a possibility I hadn't considered until now. I wiped my eyes and opened a new browser tab, searching for Walter Harrington Integrated Care Initiative. Nothing relevant appeared. This had been a private vision, one that died with him, or would have, if not for his foresight in preserving it for me. A knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. At nearly 1 a.m., it could only be one person. I opened the door to find Gregory standing in the hallway, his typical polished appearance noticeably disheveled. His tie was loosened, hair slightly mussed, and the scent of scotch hung faintly in the air. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I stepped aside to let him enter, watching as he surveyed my apartment with barely disguised condescension. Unlike the sprawling home he'd purchased in Beacon Hill, my place was modest, chosen for its proximity to the hospital rather than as a status symbol. His gaze fell on the dining table covered in company reports. Burning the midnight oil see? Trying to cram for a test you're not prepared to take. "What do you want, Gregory?" I asked, too tired for our usual verbal sparring. He turned to face me, calculation replacing the initial hostility in his eyes. "A compromise." "I'm listening." "You keep the shares officially. I run the company as CEO with full operational control. We present a united front to the board and the public. You return to your surgical career with a very generous annual dividend, and everyone gets what they want." I crossed my arms. "And if I decline?" "Then I use every resource at my disposal to challenge the trust. I tie this up in court for years. I make it impossible for you to implement any significant changes at Harrington while the litigation proceeds." He shrugged. "The company suffers. Your surgical career stalls as you're dragged into depositions and hearings, and our family's dirty laundry becomes public entertainment." It was a calculated threat, designed to appeal to both my concern for the company and my inherent dislike of public attention. A year ago, it might have worked. "You're offering me money to walk away from responsibility," I observed. Gregory frowned. "I'm offering you freedom to continue the career you've chosen. This isn't your world, Charlotte. You've never wanted a corner office or a boardroom. You've made that abundantly clear for years." He wasn't entirely wrong. I had deliberately chosen a path away from the corporate world our parents had inhabited. But something had shifted since reading my grandfather's trust documents and watching his video message. A possibility had emerged that I hadn't previously considered. "Let me ask you something," I said. "Do you remember why grandfather started Harrington Healthcare?" Gregory sighed impatiently. "To make specialized care more accessible. But that was 40 years ago, Charlotte. Healthcare has evolved. Regulatory environments have changed. Reimbursement models have transformed. The methods have changed," I agreed. "But should the mission?" The mission is to provide sustainable healthcare services while generating appropriate returns for shareholders, Gregory recited, as if reading from a corporate mission statement. That's not why he built this company, I countered. He built it because he believed patients deserved better than the fragmented, inefficient care that was the norm. He believed that coordinating care across specialties would improve outcomes and reduce costs simultaneously. I walked to my laptop and turned it toward him. Did you know he was working on something called the Integrated Care Initiative before he died? A model that would have transformed how we deliver healthcare? Gregory's expression flickered with genuine surprise before he masked it. Another one of his idealistic projects that would have bankrupted the company. Or potentially revolutionized it, I countered. We'll never know because it died with him. Or it would have, if he hadn't preserved it for me. I gestured to the documents scattered across my table. I've spent the evening reviewing our company's performance. We're profitable, yes. But our quality metrics are declining. Staff turnover is increasing. Patient satisfaction is dropping. We're making money by compromising the very things that made Harrington special in the marketplace. Gregory's jaw tightened. Those are complex metrics influenced by industry-wide factors beyond our control. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But they also reflect our priorities. And I think grandfather was right. We've lost sight of what matters most. I took a deep breath, the outlines of a decision forming in my mind. I'm not going to fight you for the CEO position, Gregory. His expression shifted to cautious triumph. So you'll accept my offer? No, I'm going to create a new position, Chief Medical Officer with special oversight of quality and patient experience. I'll continue my surgical practice part-time while developing a pilot program based on grandfather's integrated care model. Gregory scoffed. The board will never approve such a role. With 60% of voting shares, I don't actually need their approval, though I'd prefer to have it, I pointed out calmly. You can remain as CEO, focusing on the operational and financial aspects you excel at, while I focus on aligning our medical services with our founding principles. Co-leadership? Gregory looked incredulous. That's your solution? It's completely unworkable. It's unorthodox, I corrected. But it leverages both our strengths. You understand business operations in a way I don't. I understand medical care delivery in a way you don't. Together, we might actually build something remarkable. Gregory paced the length of my living room, clearly struggling with this unexpected proposal. I had offered neither capitulation nor confrontation, but a third path he hadn't anticipated. This is a recipe for constant conflict, he finally said. Or for necessary balance, I countered. The tension between financial imperatives and medical excellence is exactly what healthcare leadership should be wrestling with. Not eliminating one in favor of the other. I could see him calculating rapidly, weighing the public relations aspects, the operational challenges, the potential benefits of having a respected neurosurgeon visibly involved in company leadership. I need to think about this, he said. Finally. Take your time. The board reconvenes in 3 days. I'll present this proposal then, with or without your support. After Gregory left, I returned to my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Harrington Integrated Care Initiative, 21st Century Implementation. Below it, I began outlining a vision that merged my grandfather's original concepts with current healthcare realities and my own clinical experience. As the first light of dawn filtered through my windows, I realized I had been working for hours without pause, energized by a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. I had never sought corporate leadership, had deliberately chosen a different path. Yet now I could see the potential to impact healthcare delivery at a systemic level, to improve thousands of lives rather than hundreds. My grandfather had created an unexpected doorway, not just to financial control of a company, but to the possibility of transforming his vision into reality. Whether that doorway led to fulfillment or frustration remained to be seen, but I was increasingly certain it was one I needed to walk through. I saved the document and finally went to bed, my mind still buzzing with possibilities. For the first time since my parents' death, I fell asleep not with grief or uncertainty, but with a sense of purpose and direction. A gift from a grandfather who had seen potential in me that I hadn't fully recognized in myself. The morning after my late night revelation, I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital for my scheduled surgeries. Despite operating on minimal sleep, I felt remarkably clear-headed. Years of residency had trained me to function precisely even when fatigued, but today's clarity came from something deeper, a sense of alignment between my medical expertise and the broader purpose that was taking shape. "Dr. Harrington, we didn't expect to see you today," my chief resident, Dr. Nadia Patel, said as I entered the surgical suite. "We heard about your family's company situation. Dr. Reynolds said he could cover your procedures." "I appreciate the offer, but my patients are expecting me," I replied, reviewing the first case file. "Though I do need to discuss some scheduling. Adjustments with the department head when these procedures are complete." Throughout the day, I performed 3 complex surgeries with the focused intensity that neurosurgery demands. Each incision, each careful navigation through brain tissue, each decision point reinforced what I already knew. Medicine at its best is a perfect integration of scientific knowledge, technical skill, and profound human responsibility. This was the essence I wanted to restore to Harrington Healthcare. After my final surgery, I met with Dr. Reynolds, the department head who had recruited me to Mass General. I explained the unexpected inheritance of controlling interest in my family's healthcare system and my emerging plan to divide my time between clinical practice and corporate leadership. "Let me understand," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're turning down the position as head of neurosurgery to become some kind of hybrid surgeon executive at your family's company?" "Not turning it down. Asking for a modification," I clarified. "I'd like to continue performing surgeries 2 days per week while developing a new integrated care model at Harrington." Dr. Reynolds frowned. "Charlotte, you're one of the most talented neurosurgeons I've ever worked with. This administrative role will dilute your skills, distract your focus. Frankly, it seems like a waste of your medical training." I had anticipated this reaction. "Or it could be the fullest expression of that training," I countered. "How many times have we discussed the systemic problems that undermine excellent care? The fragmentation, the perverse incentives, the barriers between specialties? At Harrington, I have the opportunity to address those issues systematically, to create structures that support better medicine. And you believe you can do this while maintaining a surgical practice?" His skepticism was evident. "Not a full practice, certainly. But continuing to operate keeps me connected to the reality of patient care in a way that full-time executives rarely experience. That connection is essential to what I'm trying to build." Dr. Reynolds studied me thoughtfully. "You know, your grandfather gave the commencement address when I graduated from medical school. He talked about the physician's dual responsibility to the patient in front of you and to the system that serves all patients. I didn't fully appreciate what he meant until years later." This was news to me. "You knew my grandfather?" "Not personally, but his speech influenced my career choices." He sighed, then nodded slowly. 2 days per week in the OR. We'll adjust the head of neurosurgery position to co-directors, you focusing on complex cases and program development, Dr. Lieberman handling the day-to-day departmental management. Will that work?" Relief washed over me. "That would be ideal, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "What you're attempting is extraordinarily difficult. The clinical and corporate worlds speak different languages, operate with different values. Bridging that gap has broken better doctors than you and me." "I know the odds," I acknowledged, "but I have to try." With my surgical position secured, I turned to my next priority, understanding exactly what my grandfather had envisioned with his integrated care initiative. That evening, I met Alan Patterson at his home office, where he had gathered all the original documents from Walter Harrington's private files. Patterson's home reflected his character, meticulously organized, traditionally furnished, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal texts and historical biographies. He led me to a study where several boxes of files were arranged on a large table. "These are all the materials related to your grandfather's initiative," he explained. "Research studies, financial projections, pilot program outlines, correspondence with potential partners." He worked on this for nearly 3 years before his health declined too severely to continue. I opened the first folder, finding a handwritten mission statement in my grandfather's distinctive script. To create a healthcare delivery model that integrates preventative services, acute interventions, and long-term management across specialties, with coordination facilitated by technology but guided by human judgment, where financial incentives align with optimal patient outcomes rather than service volume. This was revolutionary thinking for its time, Patterson commented. Healthcare was still deeply siloed then, even more than now. Specialists rarely communicated effectively with primary care. Payment systems rewarded procedures rather than outcomes. Many of these problems still exist, I noted, scanning through the subsequent documents. We've made progress on electronic medical records, but true integration of care remains elusive. For the next several hours, I immersed myself in my grandfather's vision. He had conducted extensive research on early integrated care models, analyzed financial structures that could support outcome-based compensation, and developed detailed plans for pilot implementation within Harrington's existing facilities. Most striking was how he had anticipated objections and developed responses for each, addressing concerns about physician autonomy, implementation costs, regulatory compliance, and cultural resistance to change. My grandfather had been preparing for the battle of bringing fundamental change to healthcare delivery. Why didn't this move forward after his death? I asked Patterson. The elder attorney sighed. Your father saw it as impractical idealism. The implementation costs were substantial, the return on investment too delayed and uncertain for his taste. He preferred more immediate financial strategies. I nodded, unsurprised. And the board supported him? Most did. A few of the older members who had worked closely with your grandfather expressed reservations, but ultimately deferred to your father's leadership. As I continued exploring the files, I discovered correspondence between my grandfather and Dr. Eliza Chen, who still served on the Harrington board. They had extensively discussed implementation strategies and potential challenges. Here was a board ally I hadn't anticipated, someone who understood and had supported my grandfather's vision from its inception. Would it be possible to get copies of all these materials? I asked Patterson. I had everything digitized years ago, he replied, handing me a flash drive. Your grandfather instructed me to preserve these records specifically for this eventuality. He believed that eventually someone would revive his work, though I think even he would be surprised to learn it would be you, given the path you chose. I never knew about any of this, I said, feeling a renewed sense of connection to a grandfather I had respected, but perhaps never fully understood. We talked about medicine when I was younger, but not about his vision for healthcare systems. Patterson smiled gently. He wouldn't have burdened a child with these concerns, but he watched you carefully as you grew, noted your questions, your perspective. I believe he saw something of himself in your approach to problems, your willingness to challenge conventional thinking when it failed to serve patients properly. Armed with my grandfather's original materials, I spent the next day consulting with experts who could help translate his vision into contemporary implementation. My first call was to Dr. Rebecca Liu, a former medical school classmate who had left clinical practice to specialize in healthcare systems design. An integrated care model for a mid-sized healthcare system? She mused when I explained the project. Ambitious, especially given the regulatory environment, but potentially transformative if executed properly. Send me the materials and I'll give you my assessment. My next consultation was with Marcus Williams, a healthcare data analytics expert whose company had pioneered predictive modeling for patient outcomes. Over video conference, I explained what I was trying to accomplish. The technology to support this kind of integration exists now in ways it didn't when your grandfather developed these concepts, Marcus observed. AI-driven predictive analytics, interoperable electronic health records, remote monitoring capabilities. These tools could supercharge his original vision. What would implementation look like? I asked. Realistically, in a system like Harrington? Marcus outlined a phased approach, beginning with pilot programs in specific service lines before expanding system-wide. Start with a condition that crosses multiple specialties, congestive heart failure, for example. Build your integrated model around that patient population, demonstrate improved outcomes and cost-effectiveness, then use that success to drive broader adoption. This aligned perfectly with my grandfather's original implementation strategy. Technology had evolved, but the fundamental approach remained sound. Start small, demonstrate value, then expand. My final consultation that day was with Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare economist who specialized in innovative payment models. Her expertise would be crucial for addressing one of the most challenging aspects of the initiative, aligning financial incentives with the integrated care approach. The core problem with healthcare economics hasn't changed since your grandfather's time, Dr. Gonzalez explained. We still predominantly pay for volume rather than value, for procedures rather than outcomes. But there are now several proven models for value-based payment that would support what you're trying to build. She walked me through the options, from bundled payments for episodes of care to shared savings programs that rewarded providers for keeping patients healthy. The advantage you have is controlling both the delivery system and the payment structure within your organization. You can create internal incentives that align with your care model, even while navigating external reimbursement constraints. By the end of the day, I had compiled a comprehensive set of resources, my grandfather's original vision, updated with contemporary expertise and technology. The path forward was becoming clearer, more concrete, a phased implementation of integrated care models, beginning with targeted pilot programs and expanding based on demonstrated success. The night before the follow-up board meeting, I received an unexpected call from Gregory. "I've been thinking about your proposal," he said without preamble. "Co-leadership, with you focusing on this integrated care concept while I handle financial and operational matters." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "I have conditions," he stated firmly. "First, I remain CEO with final authority on operational decisions. Your title would be Chief Medical Officer, reporting to me on the organizational chart, though with special authority granted by the board for your medical initiatives." This was a predictable request, maintaining the appearance of his superior position while accommodating the reality of my controlling interest. "Continue," I said neutrally. "Second, any pilot programs must have clearly defined metrics for success, including financial performance indicators. If they don't meet predetermined benchmarks within specified timeframes, they get discontinued. Reasonable, provided the metrics include quality and outcome measures, not just financial ones," I countered. "Third," Gregory continued, "we present a united front publicly. No matter what disagreements we have behind closed doors, to the outside world, we are aligned in our vision for Harrington's future." This last condition revealed what mattered most to Gregory: public perception and the appearance of control. He was offering a compromise that would allow him to save face while giving me room to implement substantive changes. "I can agree to those terms," I said after a moment's consideration. "With one addition of my own. I have independence to select my own leadership team for the Integrated Care Initiative, with appropriate budget allocated for implementation." Gregory was silent for several seconds, calculating the implications. "Agreed," he finally said. "But the budget requires board approval, and I'll expect detailed proposals." "Of course." After we ended the call, I reflected on this unexpected development. Gregory had always been competitive, always needed to win. Yet here he was, offering a compromise that would allow us both to contribute in our areas of strength. Perhaps he recognized that protracted conflict would damage the company we both cared about, albeit in different ways. Or perhaps he simply calculated that this arrangement would limit my authority while preserving his position. Regardless of his motivation, the compromise created an opening, a chance to begin implementing my grandfather's vision without getting bogged down in a power struggle. It wasn't perfect, but it was a starting point from which I could build. The next morning, as I prepared for the board meeting, I felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing in the chaotic days following my parents' death and the revelation of my inheritance. I was no longer simply reacting to circumstances, but moving forward with intention. My grandfather's trust document had created an unexpected opportunity. Now it was my responsibility to gather the resources, build the right team, and create the conditions for his vision to finally become reality. With each person I consulted, each expert who contributed their knowledge, the path forward became clearer and more certain. As I gathered my materials and headed for the Harrington Healthcare headquarters, I felt my grandfather's presence not as a burden of expectations, but as an inspiration. A reminder that healthcare at its best is a perfect integration of science, compassion, and vision. Now it was my turn to carry that integration forward, not just in my own practice, but throughout the system that bore our family name. The second board meeting unfolded very differently from the first. Instead of shock and hostility, the atmosphere was one of cautious curiosity. Gregory and I entered together, presenting the united front we had agreed upon. The subtle shift in board members' expressions as they observed our apparent alignment confirmed that our strategy was working. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory began once everyone was seated, "Charlotte and I have spent considerable time discussing the future direction of Harrington Healthcare. While the circumstances are unexpected, we believe we've found a path forward that honors both our father's business acumen and our grandfather's medical vision." He outlined the compromise we had reached, his continued role as CEO overseeing operations and finances, my new position as Chief Medical Officer with special authority to develop and implement the Integrated Care Initiative. The board members listened attentively, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious optimism. Dr. Eliza Chen spoke first after Gregory concluded. "This is a fascinating development. I worked with Walter on the early concepts of integrated care years ago. It was visionary then and remains so today." She turned to me. "Dr. Harrington, what makes you believe this initiative can succeed now when it didn't move forward after your grandfather's passing?" It was the perfect question, one that acknowledged the history while opening the door to discussing the future. I activated the presentation I had prepared, displaying a timeline that compared healthcare delivery models from my grandfather's era to the present. "3 critical factors have changed," I explained. "First, technology has evolved dramatically, enabling coordination that was logistically impossible 15 years ago. Second, payment models have begun shifting toward value-based care, creating financial incentives that align with integrated approaches. And third," I paused, making eye contact with each board member, "patients themselves are demanding more coordinated care experiences." For the next 30 minutes, I presented a detailed overview of the initiative, incorporating the expertise I had gathered and updating my grandfather's original vision for contemporary healthcare realities. I concluded with a specific proposal. For our first pilot program, an integrated care pathway for stroke patients, spanning from prevention through acute treatment to rehabilitation and long-term management. We selected stroke care for our initial pilot for several reasons, I explained. It crosses multiple specialties: primary care, neurology, neurosurgery, emergency medicine, rehabilitation. It has clearly measurable outcomes, and improvements in coordination demonstrably reduce both mortality and long-term disability, which translates to better patient outcomes and lower overall costs. Throughout my presentation, Gregory remained attentive but neutral, neither undermining nor overtly supporting the initiative. When I finished, he smoothly transitioned to addressing the financial implications. "While I support exploring this direction," he stated, "we must proceed with appropriate fiscal discipline. We've developed metrics to evaluate the pilot program's success, including quality measures, patient satisfaction scores, and financial performance indicators." He displayed a slide showing the balanced scorecard we had developed, a compromise between my emphasis on patient outcomes and his focus on financial viability. "If these benchmarks aren't met within the specified timeframes, we'll reevaluate and potentially redirect resources." The board discussion that followed was engaged and substantive, focusing on implementation details rather than power struggles. By meeting's end, we had secured unanimous approval for both our leadership arrangement and the initial phase of the Integrated Care Initiative, with appropriate budget allocation for the stroke care pilot. As we left the boardroom, Gregory murmured, "That went well. Don't get used to unanimous votes. They're exceedingly rare in corporate governance." "I'll take the win," I replied. "Now comes the hard part, actually making it work." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I divided my time between surgeries at Mass General and building the foundation for the stroke care pilot at Harrington. My first challenge was assembling the right leadership team, clinicians who combined medical expertise with openness to system-level innovation. I started with Dr. Sophia Kim, a neurologist with extensive stroke management experience who had recently published research on coordination gaps in post-stroke care. When I called to discuss the position of clinical director for the pilot program, her initial response was skeptical. "An integrated care model within a traditional hospital system?" she questioned. "I've seen these initiatives before, Dr. Harrington. They typically end up as presentation slides and glossy brochures with minimal impact on actual care delivery." "I understand your skepticism," I acknowledged. "But this is different. We have leadership commitment, dedicated resources, and most importantly, the authority to redesign care pathways across departmental boundaries." "Why stroke care as the first focus?" she asked, probing my rationale. "Because it's where fragmentation costs lives," I answered simply. "The gap between evidence-based best practices and typical care delivery is wider in stroke than almost any other condition. And you know better than most the downstream consequences of poor coordination in the early critical period." Dr. Kim was silent for a moment. "Send me the detailed proposal," she finally said. "If it's as substantive as you suggest, we can continue the conversation." 2 days later, she called back. "I'm intrigued," she admitted, "especially by the approach to post-discharge care. Coordination. When can I visit to see the current state firsthand?" Within a week, Dr. Kim had signed on as clinical director. Her recruitment lent credibility that helped attract other key team members: a geriatric specialist with expertise in post-stroke cognitive assessment, a physical medicine physician who had pioneered early mobilization protocols, and a data scientist who had worked on predictive models for stroke outcomes. With the core team assembled, we faced our first significant challenge: resistance from department heads whose territories and resources would be affected by the new integrated approach. Dr. James Whitaker, head of emergency medicine, was particularly vocal in his opposition. "This will disrupt well-established protocols," he argued during our first implementation planning meeting. "Our department has spent years refining our stroke response times. Adding more decision points and communication requirements will slow us down." "I understand your concern," I responded, "but the evidence suggests otherwise. When emergency departments and neurology units use shared protocols and real-time communication tools, door-to-treatment times actually decrease." I displayed data from 3 hospital systems that had implemented similar models. These aren't theoretical improvements, they're documented outcomes from peer institutions. Dr. Whitaker remained unconvinced. Their contexts are different. Our emergency department is already operating at capacity. Adding complexity to our workflows is risky. Rather than arguing further, I shifted approach. You're right that context matters, which is why before finalizing any protocols, we want your department to help us map the current workflow in detail, identify potential bottlenecks, and design solutions that work within your operational constraints. This collaborative approach, acknowledging concerns while inviting participation in solution design, gradually reduced resistance across departments. We established interdisciplinary working groups for each phase of the stroke care continuum, ensuring that frontline clinicians had meaningful input into pathway development. Our next hurdle emerged during technology integration planning. Harrington used an electronic health record system that wasn't designed for the kind of cross-specialty coordination we envisioned. When our team met with the IT department to discuss requirements, their response was discouraging. What you're asking for would require custom development, the IT director explained. Creating dashboards that pull data across different modules, building new alert systems for care transitions, enabling multi-specialty documentation in a single interface, these aren't standard functions. What's the timeline for these customizations? I asked. Minimum 6 months for requirements gathering, then development, testing. He shrugged. Realistically, 12-18 months before full implementation. This timeline would derail our entire pilot schedule. Dr. Kim and I exchanged concerned glances. What if we took a different approach? I suggested. Rather than customizing the entire EHR, could we develop a separate coordination platform that interfaces with the existing system, something that aggregates the essential data for stroke care specifically? The IT director considered this. Possibly. It would still require integration points with the main EHR, but could be more targeted in scope. Would that reduce the timeline? Potentially to 4 to 6 months, depending on requirements and testing. Still too long for our pilot. Launch targets. I made a note to discuss alternative approaches with Gregory and the executive team. That evening, I called Marcus Williams, the healthcare data analytics expert I had consulted earlier. We have an EHR integration challenge, I explained, outlining the situation. This is exactly why healthcare innovation moves so slowly, he observed. But there's another option you might consider. Several startups have developed overlay systems specifically designed for condition-specific care coordination. They sit on top of existing EHRs, pulling relevant data through standard interfaces. What's the implementation timeline for something like that? With the right partner, 6 to 8 weeks. These systems are designed to be rapidly deployed and configured for specific use cases. They won't solve all your long-term integration needs, but they could enable your pilot to launch on schedule. This was exactly the kind of creative solution we needed. With Marcus's help, we identified 3 potential technology partners and arranged demonstrations for the following week. Meanwhile, Gregory was facing challenges of his own as he worked to reassure key stakeholders about our new direction. Several major insurance partners had expressed concern about potential disruptions to established billing and authorization processes. The insurers are nervous, he informed me during our weekly update meeting. They're comfortable with the current system, even with its inefficiencies. Change represents risk from their perspective. Even when the change could ultimately reduce their costs? I asked. Especially then, Gregory replied with uncharacteristic cynicism. Our current fragmented system generates administrative complexity that justifies their operational structure. Simplification threatens that. What do you suggest? Gregory considered for a moment. We position this as evolutionary, not revolutionary. emphasize that we're enhancing care coordination while maintaining existing billing structures, at least initially. Once we have outcomes data demonstrating cost savings, we'll have leverage to negotiate more innovative payment arrangements. It was a pragmatic approach, one that balanced my clinical vision with his business acumen. This pattern was emerging. In our working relationship, my focus on transformation tempered by his emphasis on operational feasibility. As launch date for the pilot approached, we encountered our most serious setback. Dr. Kim had developed detailed protocols for the acute phase of stroke care, addressing everything from emergency department assessment to inpatient neurology management. When we presented these protocols to the Medical Executive Committee for approval, we met unexpected resistance from Dr. Victor Reynoso, the influential head of neurology. These protocols represent a fundamental departure from our current approach, he declared. They shift responsibilities between departments, alter decision pathways, and introduce new documentation requirements. I cannot support implementation without more extensive review and revision. His opposition was particularly problematic, given his standing in the organization and the centrality of neurology to stroke care. Without his department's cooperation, the pilot would be severely compromised. I requested a private meeting with Dr. Reynoso the following day, determined to understand the true source of his resistance. In his office, surrounded by awards and certificates testifying to his distinguished career, I took a direct approach. "You've been with Harrington for 23 years, I began. You built the neurology department into one of the most respected in the region. I'm curious why these integrated care protocols concern you so deeply." He studied me carefully before responding. "You're new to administration, Dr. Harrington. You see problems and solutions. What you don't yet see are the complex interdependencies that make healthcare organizations function. Help me understand those interdependencies as they relate to stroke care," I requested. Dr. Reynoso sighed. "Your protocols assume perfect communication and cooperation between departments that have historically operated independently. They presuppose that emergency physicians will consult neurologists earlier in the decision process, that radiologists will prioritize stroke imaging above other urgent cases, that rehabilitation specialists will begin assessment within 24 hours of admission. All of which is supported by evidence as best practice," I noted. "Evidence from controlled studies, not real-world implementations across departments with different priorities and resource constraints," he countered. "Moreover, your protocols distribute responsibility in ways that blur accountability. When outcomes are poor, who bears responsibility? The emergency physician who made the initial assessment? The neurologist who directed treatment? The system as a whole?" This was the core of his concern, not territorial protection, but a genuine question about accountability in an integrated model. It was a legitimate issue that our implementation plan hadn't adequately addressed. "You've identified a critical gap in our approach," I acknowledged. "We've focused on coordination mechanics without sufficiently defining accountability structures. Would you be willing to help us develop that framework?" My candid acknowledgement of the oversight and invitation to collaborate visibly surprised him. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "Based on boardroom rumors, I anticipated someone more dogmatic." "I'm a neurosurgeon," I reminded him. "In the operating room, being right matters more than being in charge." The same principle applies here. By meeting's end, Dr. Reynoso had agreed to chair a working group on accountability structures for the integrated care model, converting a potential opponent into a collaborator by acknowledging his legitimate concerns and incorporating his expertise. As we approached the pilot launch date, these early challenges, departmental resistance, technology limitations, stakeholder concerns, and governance questions, had ultimately strengthened our implementation plan rather than derailing it. Each obstacle forced us to refine our approach, build broader coalitions, and address potential failure points proactively. The evening before launch, I found myself back in my grandfather's study at Harrington House, surrounded by his books, and the subtle scent of leather and old paper that had always defined this space for me. On his desk sat the framed mission statement that had guided his creation of Harrington Healthcare: to heal with compassion, innovate with purpose, and serve with integrity. Tomorrow we would begin testing whether his integrated care vision, updated for contemporary healthcare realities, could fulfill that mission more effectively than the fragmented approach that had become standard. These first tests would reveal whether my unexpected inheritance would truly become a vehicle for meaningful change, or simply another well-intentioned healthcare initiative that failed to overcome systemic inertia. As I traced my fingers over my grandfather's handwritten words, I felt both the weight of responsibility and the exhilaration of possibility. The path ahead would undoubtedly present more challenges, more resistance, more unexpected obstacles. But each one would serve as a test and refinement of the vision. A vision that had waited 15 years for its chance to transform from concept to reality. 6 weeks after launching the stroke care pilot program, I stood in Harrington Healthcare's newly established Integrated Care Command Center, observing the cross-functional team in action. The room hummed with purposeful energy as clinicians from different specialties collaborated in real time, supported by the data visualization dashboards we had implemented with remarkable speed. Dr. Chen, arriving in emergency department with acute stroke symptoms, onset approximately 45 minutes ago, announced the care coordinator, updating the digital patient journey map displayed on the main screen. CT scan scheduled, neurology team notified, family en route. I watched as the system automatically triggered notifications to the appropriate team members, while the stroke care navigator, a new role we had created, began preparing for post-acute care planning even as the patient was receiving initial treatment. This seamless coordination was exactly what my grandfather had envisioned, now enabled by technology that hadn't existed in his time. Dr. Kim approached, tablet in hand, displaying our real-time metrics dashboard. We've reduced door-to-needle time by an average of 12 minutes in the first 6 weeks, she reported. And our care transition quality scores are up 22% compared to historical data. What about readmissions? I asked, knowing this would be a key indicator for the financial viability of our approach. Down 17% for the pilot population, she replied with satisfaction. We're tracking longer-term outcomes, of course, but the early indicators are promising. These results exceeded our initial projections. The integrated approach was demonstrating measurable improvements in both clinical outcomes and operational efficiency, precisely the combination needed to prove the model's sustainability. As I was about to respond, my phone vibrated with a text message from Gregory. Meeting, my office, 30 minutes. Important. The urgency in his message was unusual. Gregory typically scheduled our update meetings days in advance, with carefully prepared agendas. An impromptu summons suggested something unexpected had occurred. I found him in his office with Martin Reeves, our CFO, and Philip Winters, our legal counsel. Their expressions conveyed tension that immediately put me on alert. We have a situation. Gregory began without preamble. Unity Health Partners has announced a new advanced stroke care initiative across their entire regional network. The press release went out this morning. Unity Health Partners was our largest competitor, a rapidly expanding healthcare system that had been aggressively acquiring hospitals and physician practices throughout New England for the past 5 years. They're implementing an integrated care model for stroke management, Martin added, sliding a tablet across the desk with the press release displayed. The description is remarkably similar to our pilot program, down to specific coordination, protocols, and outcome metrics. I scanned the document, my initial surprise giving way to concern as I recognized multiple elements that matched our approach almost exactly. This is too similar to be coincidental, I observed. The care transition protocols are nearly identical to ours. It's not coincidental, Philip confirmed grimly. We believe someone shared our implementation documents with Unity. The question is who and how much damage has been done. Do we know the source of the leak? I asked. Gregory's expression tightened. We have suspicions. Dr. Lawrence Ryder joined Unity as their new chief of neurology last week. Until then, he was our associate director of stroke services. I finished, the implications immediately clear. Dr. Ryder had been part of our implementation team, with access to detailed protocols and strategic plans. Has he taken other staff with him? 2 nurses and a care coordinator so far, Martin replied. We're monitoring for additional departures. This was a significant threat, not just the loss of personnel familiar with our approach, but the potential acceleration of a competitor's entry into the integrated care space we were pioneering. What's our exposure here? I asked Philip. Limited legal recourse, unfortunately, he explained. While we have standard non-disclosure agreements, proving that specific clinical protocols constitute proprietary information is challenging in healthcare. Treatment approaches aren't typically protected the way technological innovations would be. What does this mean for our pilot program? I directed this question to Gregory, curious how he would frame the situation. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed in thought. It means the timeline has changed. We're no longer operating in isolation, with the luxury of methodical testing and refinement. Unity will be promoting their program aggressively, positioning themselves as the regional leader in innovative stroke care. They've eliminated our first-mover advantage, Martin added, and given their size and marketing budget, they could potentially define this space in the public mind before we have a chance to fully establish our model. I considered the implications. My initial instinct was disappointment. Our carefully designed pilot program, meant to develop and refine the integrated care approach before broader implementation, was now under competitive pressure. But as I reflected further, I recognized an opportunity within the challenge. This changes our landscape, certainly, I acknowledged, but it also validates our direction. Unity wouldn't invest in replicating our approach unless they recognized its potential value. Gregory studied me with surprised approval. Precisely. They've essentially confirmed our market assessment with their own resources. So what's our response? I asked, looking at each person in the room. Martin spoke first. From a financial perspective, we should consider accelerating our implementation timeline. The preliminary results justify expanded investment. Philip added his legal perspective. While we can't prevent Unity from using similar approaches, we can protect our unique combinations of protocols and technologies. I suggest we immediately file for trademark protection on the specific coordination systems we've developed. Gregory nodded, then turned to me. From a medical leadership perspective, what do you recommend? The question acknowledged my domain, expertise in a way that signaled our evolving partnership. We double down on quality and outcomes, I answered confidently. Unity may have copied our structural approach, but exceptional care coordination requires more than protocols. It requires culture change, leadership alignment, and clinical expertise working in genuine collaboration. I activated the tablet display, showing our latest outcomes data. These results weren't achieved through documents alone. They came from how our teams are working together differently, how we've aligned incentives across departments, how we've embedded accountability throughout the care journey. These aren't things Unity can simply replicate by hiring a few staff, members, or copying protocols, I continued. They reflect fundamental organizational changes that take time and commitment to develop. Gregory considered this. So we leverage our authentic integration as a competitive advantage. Exactly. And we accelerate in 2 directions simultaneously, expanding our stroke care model to all Harrington facilities while initiating our second planned pilot for cardiac care coordination. This dual-track approach would be resource-intensive, but the competitive threat justified the accelerated timeline. More importantly, It would demonstrate our comprehensive commitment to the integrated care vision, distinguishing us from Unity's more opportunistic adoption. That's an aggressive expansion, Martin cautioned. The financial implications need to be evaluated against the cost of losing market position. Gregory interrupted, surprising me with his support for the accelerated approach. Sometimes the riskiest strategy is excessive caution. He turned to his computer and pulled up a regional map showing Harrington and Unity facilities. Unity has more hospitals, but we have deeper specialty expertise and stronger academic affiliations. If we position ourselves as the authentic leaders in integration, the organization that's not just adopting protocols, but fundamentally rethinking care delivery, we can establish a distinctive market position. The conversation continued for another hour as we developed a comprehensive response strategy. By meeting's end, we had outlined an accelerated implementation plan that would expand the stroke care model across all Harrington facilities within 90 days while launching our cardiac care integration pilot within 60 days. As we concluded, Gregory held me back after Martin and Philip departed. "You surprised me today," he admitted. "I expected you to be more disappointed by Unity's move." "I was initially," I acknowledged. "But my surgical training taught me something valuable about unexpected challenges. They often reveal whether your approach is fundamentally sound or merely working under ideal conditions." Gregory nodded thoughtfully. "Our father would have responded to Unity's announcement with aggressive legal action and an all-out marketing war." "And our grandfather?" I prompted, curious about his perspective. A slight smile crossed Gregory's face. He would have said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then proceeded to innovate beyond what the imitators could follow. "That's our opportunity," I agreed. "Unity can copy what we've done. They can't copy what we're going to do next." The competitive challenge galvanized our organization in unexpected ways. When we announced the accelerated implementation timeline, clinicians and staff who had been hesitant about the changes now embraced them with renewed purpose. The external threat created internal cohesion, a shared determination to demonstrate that Harrington's approach to integrated care represented something genuine and transformative, not merely a marketing strategy. Dr. Sophia Kim expanded her leadership role, developing a specialized training program for care coordinators that became a distinct competitive advantage. "Unity can hire staff with technical skills," she observed during our strategy session. "But they can't instantly create the collaborative mindset our teams are developing through deliberate culture change." We leveraged our academic affiliations to establish an integrated care research collaborative, partnering with medical schools to study and publish findings from our implementation. This positioned Harrington as the scientific leader in care integration, while creating a pipeline of physicians and nurses specifically trained in our approach. The data visualization company that had developed our coordination dashboard proved to be another unexpected advantage. Impressed by our clinical expertise and commitment to evidence-based innovation, they proposed co-developing an enhanced platform specifically designed for multi-specialty coordination. This partnership would give us proprietary technology that unified clinical data in ways our competitors couldn't easily replicate. Throughout this period of accelerated implementation, I continued my surgical practice 2 days per week at Mass General. This clinical immersion proved invaluable, grounding our innovations in the reality of patient care and providing insights that purely administrative leadership might have missed. "You're in a unique position," Dr. Reynolds commented after we completed a particularly challenging tumor resection together. "You see both the forest and the trees, the system-level patterns and the individual patient experience. This dual perspective shaped our implementation in subtle but important ways. When the IT team proposed streamlining the coordination platform by removing certain clinical detail fields, my recent experience with a complex stroke case led me to insist on maintaining that granularity. Those details change treatment decisions in ways that aren't always captured by standardized protocols," I explained. 6 months after Unity Health Partners announced their stroke initiative, the healthcare landscape in our region had transformed. What had begun as a threat to our carefully planned pilot program had catalyzed a complete reimagining of how we delivered care across multiple service lines. Industry publications began featuring stories about the integration revolution taking place in New England healthcare, with Harrington consistently cited as the pioneer and thought leader. Our outcomes data, showing significant improvements in both clinical metrics and cost efficiency, attracted attention from national healthcare organizations and policymakers. Unity's program, meanwhile, had encountered implementation challenges that validated our approach to organizational change. Without the cultural foundation and cross-departmental collaboration we had carefully cultivated, their structural changes weren't yielding the same results. They had the protocols, but lacked the philosophy and leadership alignment essential for true integration. They tried to copy our recipe without understanding the ingredients, Gregory observed during our quarterly review meeting. His initial skepticism about the integrated care concept had evolved into genuine advocacy as the business benefits became increasingly evident. The competitive landscape had pushed us to move faster and think more expansively than we might have otherwise. What had begun as a carefully controlled pilot had transformed into a system-wide revolution in care delivery. Exactly the kind of transformation my grandfather had envisioned but never lived to implement. As I reviewed our progress with the executive team, I reflected on how the unexpected inheritance of controlling interest in Harrington Healthcare had changed not just my career trajectory, but the care experience of thousands of patients. The trust document that had so shocked Gregory and me at the outset had created the conditions for innovation that might never have emerged otherwise. Next quarter, we expand to our third service line, I announced to the leadership team. Comprehensive diabetes management with integrated primary care, endocrinology, ophthalmology, podiatry, and nutrition services. The implementation team is already mapping care pathways and coordination points. Gregory added the financial perspective. Initial projections indicate potential savings of 22% per patient over 5 years, primarily through reduced complications and emergency interventions. Those savings more than offset the investment in coordination resources. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Eliza Chen, who had known my grandfather during his leadership of Harrington, approached me with a small smile. "Walter would be extraordinarily proud," she said quietly, "not just of what you've built, but of how you've built it, with both vision and pragmatism, exactly as he would have done." The competitive challenge that had initially threatened our careful plans had ultimately accelerated and strengthened our transformation. Unity's attempt to copy our approach had pushed us to articulate and demonstrate what made Harrington's integration model distinctive. Not just the structural elements that could be replicated, but the leadership philosophy, organizational culture, and authentic commitment to patient-centered care that could not. As I left the executive suite that evening, I passed the portrait of my grandfather in the main lobby. The plaque beneath it had recently been updated to include his original vision statement for Harrington Healthcare, newly relevant in the integrated care era we were creating. Medicine at its best is a perfect integration of science, compassion, and human connection, never to be divided into separate concerns, but always practiced as a unified art. What had begun as an inheritance I never sought had become a platform for realizing a vision larger than my individual practice could ever have achieved. A transformation in healthcare delivery that honored my grandfather's legacy while creating something entirely new. 1 year after launching our first integrated care pilot, Harrington Healthcare had transformed from a traditional hospital system into a recognized innovator in coordinated care delivery. The initial stroke program had expanded to include cardiac care, diabetes management, and most recently, comprehensive geriatric services. Each expansion had built upon lessons from previous implementations, refining our approach and strengthening our market position. Yet despite our success, I recognized that we were approaching a critical inflection point. The existing leadership structure, designed for rapid implementation and early wins, wasn't optimal for long-term sustainability and continued innovation. The time had come to establish a dedicated team with the specific expertise needed to take our integrated care model to the next level. We need to formalize the integrated care division, I explained to Gregory during our monthly strategy session. The current matrix structure with borrowed resources from various departments was effective for pilots, but it's creating strain as we expand. Gregory studied the organizational chart I had projected on the screen. You're proposing a significant structural change, he observed. New leadership positions, dedicated staff, separate budget allocations. The results justify the investment, I replied, displaying the outcomes data from our established programs. We've demonstrated clinical improvements across every metric we're tracking, and the financial returns are materializing even faster than projected. But to maintain this trajectory, we need the right team in place. Gregory considered this, then nodded. I agree, but recruitment will be challenging. The skill sets you're describing, clinical expertise combined with system-level thinking and change management experience, are rare in healthcare leadership. That's why we need to be creative in our approach, I said. Some positions will fill through traditional recruitment, but others might require developing talent in new ways. The board readily approved establishing the integrated care division with me as executive director, maintaining my role as chief medical officer while focusing my administrative responsibilities on this strategic priority. The next challenge was building the core team that would drive innovation forward. My first recruitment target was Dr. Sophia Kim, who had proven herself an exceptional leader as clinical director of the stroke program. I invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the hospital, away from the interruptions of our daily work environment. I'm guessing this isn't just a social occasion, she remarked as we settled at our table. The last time you had that particular expression, you were about to propose accelerating our implementation timeline. I smiled, appreciating her perceptiveness. You've been instrumental to our success, Sophia. The stroke program exceeds all expectations. Your clinical leadership is respected across departments, and you've shown remarkable skill in navigating organizational politics. Thank you, she replied, her expression cautious. But I sense there's more. I'd like you to consider becoming clinical integration officer for the entire division, I said. You would oversee clinical protocols across all service lines, ensure consistency in our approach, and help develop new integrated care pathways as we expand. Sophia set down her water glass carefully. That's a significant promotion, and a step away from direct patient care. Not entirely, I countered. The role would include 20% clinical time, maintaining your connection to practice. But yes, it would shift your focus toward system design and clinical leadership. She considered this thoughtfully. What about my stroke program? You've built something remarkable, I acknowledged. But you've also developed a team that can carry it forward. Dr. Patel is ready for greater responsibility with your mentorship. And what about my research? She asked. Sophia had recently received grant funding for a study on post-stroke cognitive assessment protocols. That would remain part of your portfolio, I assured her. In fact, expanding our research agenda is a key aspect of this role. We want to publish our findings, contribute to the evidence base for integrated care approaches. Sophia was silent for a long moment, weighing the opportunity. My fellowship director warned me about leaving clinical practice for administration, she finally said. He said administrators forget what it means to care for patients. That's why this division is different, I replied. Everyone in leadership maintains clinical practice. We make decisions as clinicians first, administrators second. Her expression shifted from hesitation to curiosity. Who else are you recruiting for the leadership team? That's partly why I'm talking to you first, I admitted. I value your input on building the rest of the team. We need complementary strengths, diverse perspectives. By dessert, Sophia had accepted the position, contingent on certain assurances about research support and continued clinical practice. More importantly, she had become an active participant in shaping the division's leadership structure, suggesting potential candidates and identifying critical skill sets we would need. Mikai. Next recruitment conversation was considerably more challenging. Marcus Williams, the healthcare data analytics expert who had consulted on our initial implementation, had impressed everyone with his ability to translate clinical needs into technological solutions. I wanted him as our chief analytics officer, but he was reluctant to leave his successful consulting practice. "I appreciate the offer, Charlotte," he said when I visited his Cambridge office, "but I value my independence. Working with multiple health systems gives me perspective that I'd lose in a single organization." "I understand that concern," I acknowledged. "But consider what you could build with dedicated resources and consistent leadership support. The analytics infrastructure you envisioned for our coordination platform? You could develop it fully, test it across multiple service lines, and publish the results." Marcus shook his head. "It's tempting, but consulting gives me flexibility that corporate employment doesn't. I can choose my projects, control my schedule." I had anticipated this objection and came prepared with an unorthodox proposal. "What if you didn't have to choose between consulting and joining our team?" I suggested. "We're creating a new model for the Chief Analytics Officer position, 80% commitment to Harrington, with explicit permission to continue select consulting engagements and maintain your academic affiliations." His expression registered surprise. "That's unusual for a leadership position." "Healthcare is evolving," I replied. "Traditional employment models don't always attract the talent we need. We're willing to be flexible for the right people." After several follow-up conversations and careful negotiation of terms, Marcus agreed to join our team. His hybrid role would later become a model for other specialized positions, allowing us to attract experts who might never have considered traditional hospital employment. The most unexpected addition to our core team came through tragedy. Dr. Naomi Winters, a respected endocrinologist who had been skeptical of our initial diabetes care integration efforts, experienced a dramatic change in perspective when her husband suffered a severe stroke and encountered the fragmentation of care she had previously defended as necessary specialization. "I watched 7 different specialists treat my husband," she told me when she requested a meeting 3 months after his stroke. "Each one excellent in their domain, each one completely unaware of what the others were doing. The burden of coordination fell entirely on me, a physician with insider knowledge of the system. What happens to patients without that advantage?" Her question was rhetorical, but I answered anyway. "They fall through the cracks, their care is compromised, their outcomes suffer." "I was wrong about your integrated care model," she admitted with remarkable candor. "I saw it as an administrative imposition on clinical practice. Now I understand it's about filling gaps that shouldn't exist in the first place." Dr. Winters had come to the meeting with more than an apology. She had developed a proposal for enhancing our diabetes program based on her dual perspective as specialist and family caregiver. Her insights were valuable, her passion evident. "Have you considered a more formal role in our integration efforts?" I asked after reviewing her thoughtful recommendations. She seemed surprised by the question. "I assumed my previous opposition would disqualify me." "Quite the opposite," I assured her. "Your skepticism makes you valuable. You understand the legitimate concerns of specialists who worry about losing autonomy or compromising depth for the sake of coordination." Within a month, Dr. Winters had joined our leadership team as Patient Experience Director, bringing a unique combination of clinical expertise and personal experience with fragmented care. Her previous resistance to our approach, transformed by direct experience into passionate advocacy, made her extraordinarily effective at engaging skeptical physicians. The final core leadership position presented the greatest recruitment challenge. We needed a care model innovation director, someone with deep understanding of both clinical operations and payment systems who could design sustainable approaches that worked within existing reimbursement constraints while pushing toward value-based models. After several unsuccessful recruitment attempts, I found myself discussing the position with Gregory during one of our weekly update meetings. "We've interviewed 5 candidates," I explained, "all highly qualified on paper, but none with the right combination of vision and pragmatism. We need someone who can see beyond current constraints without ignoring them entirely." Gregory was uncharacteristically quiet, studying the position description I had shared. "What about Nathan Chen?" he finally suggested. I blinked in surprise. "Your former business school classmate? The one who left healthcare for management? Consulting?" "He did leave healthcare," Gregory confirmed, "after 5 frustrating years trying to implement payment reform at Beacon Health. But he's maintained his interest in healthcare innovation. We had dinner last month, and he spoke at length about the limitations of current reimbursement models." This was unexpected. Gregory rarely suggested candidates for clinical leadership positions, deferring to my judgment in that domain. More surprising was his recommendation of someone who had left healthcare out of frustration with its resistance to change. "Why would he consider returning?" I asked. "If he left because of systemic barriers to innovation, those barriers largely still exist." "Because what we're building might actually work," Gregory replied simply. "Nathan didn't leave healthcare because he stopped caring about it. He left because he couldn't find a path to meaningful change within existing structures." The conversation with Nathan Chen proved Gregory's instincts correct. Over video conference, Nathan's initial skepticism about the position gave way to cautious interest as I described our integrated care model and early results. "What makes you think you can succeed where larger systems have struggled?" he asked, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "3 factors," I replied. "First, physician leadership with continuing clinical practice. We understand the frontline realities because we experience them. Second, our size. We're large enough to have impact but small enough for meaningful organizational change. And third, aligned governance. Our board has explicitly prioritized integrated care as our strategic direction." By call's end, Nathan had agreed to visit Harrington to observe our programs firsthand. His eventual decision to join our team as Care Model Innovation Director completed our core leadership group, a diverse team of experts united by commitment to transforming care delivery through integration. With the leadership team in place, we turned our attention to building the broader staff that would implement our expanding programs. This presented a different challenge, attracting talented clinicians and administrators who would embrace our collaborative approach and help shape our evolving culture. "Traditional job postings won't be sufficient," Dr. Winters observed during our recruitment planning session. "We need people who are drawn to our mission, not just seeking employment." This insight led us to develop an innovative approach to talent acquisition. Rather than conventional recruiting, we created a series of educational forums on integrated care, inviting healthcare professionals from throughout the region to learn about our model. These events served dual purposes, disseminating knowledge about care coordination while identifying potential team members whose questions and engagement revealed alignment with our vision. We also established formal fellowships in integrated care delivery, partnering with medical and nursing schools to create structured training programs that prepared early career professionals for this emerging specialty. These fellows became a valuable pipeline for permanent positions while infusing our organization with fresh perspectives and contemporary training. Perhaps our most effective recruiting strategy emerged organically through storytelling. We encouraged team members to share their experiences through professional publications, conference presentations, and social media. These authentic narratives, describing both successes and challenges, attracted like-minded professionals who recognized their own frustrations with fragmented care in our stories. Dr. Miranda Gutierrez, a primary care physician who joined us from a large multi-specialty practice, explained her decision this way. I read an article by one of your team members describing how they redesigned the care transition process for stroke patients. It wasn't a promotional piece. It detailed the mistakes they made, the resistance they encountered, and how they persevered. I thought, these are people I want to work with, honest about challenges, committed to improvement. As our team expanded, we focused intensively on onboarding and acculturation. New team members participated in cross-functional orientation experiences, spending time in different departments to understand the entire care continuum from multiple perspectives. Medical specialists shadowed primary care visits, administrators accompanied patients through care transitions, and everyone, regardless of role, participated in collaborative problem-solving sessions addressing actual coordination challenges. We're not just hiring for skills, I explained to Gregory as we reviewed the growing division's progress. We're building a community of practice, people who share a fundamental belief that integration is essential to excellent care, who see coordination not as an administrative burden but as a clinical imperative. 18 months after formally establishing the Integrated Care Division, we had assembled a team of over 70 professionals across clinical, analytical, technological, and administrative domains. This team had expanded our integrated model to 6 service lines, demonstrating improved outcomes in each while developing increasing sophistication in our approach. Most gratifying was the evolution from implementation to innovation. Team members weren't simply executing predetermined protocols but actively improving our model through continuous learning and adaptation. The culture we had cultivated was paying dividends in the form of organic improvements suggested by staff at all levels. During our division's first annual retreat, I looked around the room at the remarkably diverse team we had assembled. Experienced physicians alongside early career nurses, data scientists collaborating with care coordinators, administrators engaged in substantive discussion with frontline clinicians. What united this diverse group was shared commitment to a simple but profound idea: that patients deserve care that comes together seamlessly around their needs, rather than forcing them to navigate disconnected fragments of an unnecessarily complex system. This team represents the future of healthcare, I observed in my closing remarks. Not because of titles or credentials, but because you've chosen to tackle the most fundamental challenge in modern medicine: reintegrating what should never have been fragmented in the first place. As the retreat concluded, Dr. Sophia Kim approached me with a reflective smile. When you first recruited me, I worried about losing my connection to direct patient care, she admitted. I was wrong. What we're building here touches more lives than I could ever reach in clinical practice alone. Her observation captured perfectly what made our team exceptional: the recognition that system transformation was not separate from patient care but an extension of it, enabling healing at scale that individual practice alone could never achieve. The quarterly board meeting should have been a celebration. Our integrated care division had exceeded every benchmark established. For its first 18 months of operation, clinical outcomes had improved across all service lines, patient satisfaction scores had reached unprecedented levels, and the financial results were finally validating our model's sustainability. Even skeptical board members now acknowledged the success of our approach. I had just concluded my presentation when Gregory's assistant entered the boardroom, handing him a note. His expression shifted as he read it, a subtle tightening around the eyes that I had learned to recognize as concealed concern. "Let's take a 15-minute break," he announced, glancing meaningfully in my direction. In the privacy of his office, Gregory closed the door and handed me a press release that had been embargoed until that morning. Horizon Health Partners announces acquisition of Unity Health System, creating region's largest integrated care network. Horizon Health Partners was a national healthcare corporation known for aggressive expansion and cost-cutting efficiency measures, the antithesis of the patient-centered approach we had been cultivating at Harrington. Unity agreed to acquisition? I asked, scanning the details. They've fiercely guarded their independence for decades. Their financial position has been deteriorating, Gregory explained. Their attempted copy of our integrated care model consumed significant resources without delivering comparable results. This left them vulnerable. The strategic implications were immediately apparent. Unity's facilities, combined with Horizon's existing regional presence, would create a healthcare system 3 times our size, with substantially greater market, power, and resources. The press release specifically mentions accelerating Unity's integrated care initiatives with Horizon's proven standardization methodologies, I noted, the corporate euphemism almost comical in its transparency. Gregory nodded grimly. They're positioning to directly challenge our market differentiation, but with an approach that prioritizes standardization over personalization, efficiency over effectiveness. What's the board's reaction? Mixed, Gregory admitted. Some see this as validation of our strategy, competitors investing billions to pursue similar positioning. Others worry about our ability to compete against an organization with Horizon's resources and scale advantages. And your assessment? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Our working relationship had evolved significantly over the past 2 years, developing into a partnership that balanced my clinical vision with his business acumen. Gregory considered carefully before responding. It's both opportunity and threat. Horizon will bring financial discipline and operational scale to Unity's struggling programs. But their standardized corporate approach to integration lacks the physician leadership and clinical nuance that distinguishes our model. They'll be formidable competitors, but fundamentally different in philosophy. His analysis aligned with my own thinking. We can't match their scale or marketing budget, I acknowledged, but we can deepen our authentic commitment to patient-centered integration in ways they can't easily replicate. Exactly, Gregory agreed. Now we need to articulate that distinction clearly to the board and to the market. We returned to the boardroom to find the directors already discussing the announcement. Opinions divided on its implications for Harrington's strategy. This acquisition fundamentally changes our competitive landscape, argued Martin Reeves, our CFO. Horizon brings national resources and standardized protocols that could allow them to deliver integrated care at lower cost, even if quality is somewhat compromised. Dr. Eliza Chen countered immediately. Standardization isn't integration. True coordination requires clinical judgment and personalization, exactly what corporate protocols tend to eliminate in pursuit of efficiency. The debate continued until Gregory raised his hand for attention. This development certainly warrants careful consideration, he began. But let's be clear about what it represents. Our largest competitor has just invested billions to emulate the direction we established 2 years ago. He displayed a slide comparing Harrington's outcomes data with the limited metrics Unity had published from their stroke program. Our approach is delivering superior results because it was designed by clinicians for patients, not by consultants for balance sheets. I followed Gregory's lead, addressing the clinical perspective. Horizon's acquisition of Unity will intensify market competition, absolutely. But it also clarifies the choice patients and referring physicians now face: authentic integration, led by practicing clinicians versus corporatized standardization managed through administrative protocols. By meeting's end, the board had reaffirmed their commitment to our strategy while authorizing additional resources to strengthen our market position in response to the new competitive threat. As we prepared to face this challenge, a more personal confrontation emerged from an unexpected quarter. 3 days after the board meeting, I received a call from my brother. "Have you seen today's Boston Business Journal?" Gregory asked without preamble, his voice uncharacteristically tense. "No, I've been in surgery since 6 this morning. There's a feature article about the acquisition, with extensive quotes from Horizon's new regional president, Richard Harrington. The name hit me like a physical shock. Our cousin Richard? Dad's brother's son? The very same, Gregory confirmed. Apparently, he joined Horizon 6 months ago after leaving his position at Deloitte Healthcare Consulting. The article presents him as the architectural brain behind the acquisition strategy. Richard Harrington had been a peripheral presence in our family, our father's brother's son, a decade older than us, who had followed a traditional corporate career path in healthcare management consulting. We had seen him occasionally at family gatherings, but he had maintained little connection with the company our grandfather had built. What exactly does the article say? I asked, a sense of foreboding growing. It's positioned as a family drama playing out in the healthcare marketplace, Gregory replied, frustration evident in his voice. Richard is quoted saying that Harrington Healthcare has lost its way under inexperienced leadership, pursuing idealistic but financially unsustainable care models that prioritize physician preferences over operational excellence. I felt a strange combination of anger and bewilderment. Richard had never shown particular interest in our grandfather's vision or our family's company. Now he was publicly challenging our leadership and strategy from a competitor's executive suite. There's more, Gregory continued. He specifically criticizes your division, suggesting that physician-led integration is inherently inefficient and that true excellence requires professional management, not clinicians playing at administration. That's a direct attack on our fundamental approach, I observed, keeping my voice steady despite the personal sting of his criticism. It gets worse, Gregory warned. He claims insider knowledge of our operations through family connections and suggests that our outcomes data is selectively reported to create a misleading impression of success. This crossed the line from competitive positioning to professional defamation. That's simply false, I replied. Our outcomes reporting follows standard academic protocols, with methodology fully disclosed in our publications. I know, Gregory agreed. But the insinuation is powerful, especially coming from someone with our family name. Richard's emergence as the public face of our most significant competitor transformed an impersonal corporate challenge into something more personal and pointed. His criticism directly targeted the principles that had guided our work: physician leadership, patient-centered integration, and authentic quality measurement. The following morning, I arrived at my office to find a handwritten note had been delivered overnight. The stationery was expensive, the penmanship precise and familiar from holiday cards received years ago. Charlotte, I imagine today's article came as a surprise. Perhaps we should discuss the future of healthcare delivery in our region over dinner. My assistant can arrange a convenient time. Family matters should be addressed personally, don't you think? Richard. The presumption in his tone was breathtaking, as if his public criticism of our work had been a minor social faux pas rather than a deliberate professional attack. More troubling was the implicit suggestion that family matters might be negotiated privately, outside normal business channels. I showed the note to Gregory when he arrived for our morning meeting. His expression darkened as he read it. He's trying to establish a back channel, Gregory observed. Create the impression that there are family discussions happening separate from official corporate communications. Which would undermine confidence in our leadership, I added, suggesting decisions might be influenced by family dynamics rather than business judgment. How do you want to handle this? Gregory asked. I considered carefully. The easiest approach would be ignoring Richard's overture, but that risked appearing reactive or intimidated. Accepting his invitation for a private dinner would create exactly the impression of back-channel discussions he seemed to be seeking. We respond officially and transparently, I decided. A formal letter from both of us addressing his public. Statements, correcting factual misrepresentations about our outcomes data, and declining any private discussions outside normal corporate channels. Gregory nodded approvingly. We copy the letter to both boards of directors, establishing a clear record of our position and approach. This measured response set the tone for our broader strategy in facing the competitive threat Horizon's acquisition represented. Rather than allowing Richard's provocative statements to distract us from our mission, we doubled down on demonstrating the distinctive value of our approach. When Richard launched a media campaign highlighting Horizon's standardized excellence approach to integrated care, we responded not with competitive advertising, but with a series of academic publications detailing our outcomes, data, and methodology. When Horizon announced a price-based strategy to attract regional employers to their network, we invited HR directors to observe our integrated care teams in action, experiencing firsthand the qualitative differences in our approach. Richard's most aggressive move came 3 months after the acquisition, when Horizon announced plans to build a new Center for Advanced Integration directly across from Harrington's main campus. The transparent attempt to physically encroach on our territory was accompanied by a hiring campaign explicitly targeting our staff with substantial financial incentives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.